believe I forgot that, but I'm going to do it now before it's too late, so I can recap some of the early stuff. Okay. Here we go. My fault. I was all set to start recording and got distracted and forgot that one key part. So, all right. So we're looking at the four worlds of, go back here to the beginning for, oops, hold on. Just in case somebody taps in here later and says, oh, no, wrong way. Giving away the farm here. All right. So we started here at the idea we're covering two templates, 4 and 10, that appear throughout the Tanakh. I'll re-explain those shortly. Okay, and then the 4-letter name of God is the section we're on now, the four-part template with YHVH. And just show these in case somebody wants to see them. They can stop the screen. Okay, so we're back here. There are 7 heavens. Yeah, you'll even see something in the New Testament where Paul refers to going up to the 3rd heaven, and his description of that 3rd heaven is exactly the same as it's described in a couple of other places in Midrash. It's exactly the same. It's where someone goes to get their instructions, their marching orders, if you will, on what to do. It's interesting. All right, so the idea here, let's go back to Berea up top. Again, this is the highest part of creation, if you will. And none of this stuff is physically vertical or horizontal. Of course, we just use those words to describe things. And then, of course, beyond creation, as we talked about earlier, is something before creation or beyond creation, because Genesis tells us in the beginning something called Elohim created creation. So the concept of a God, a power, a great power that is beyond creation exists, still part of existence, because we can deal with it, we can understand it and talk about it to varying degrees. So it's part of that which exists that we can contemplate with our minds. Okay, on this particular old picture, it looks like they have I don't know what they have here. I don't know. I'm trying to see what that is. Okay, anyhow. So the reason I added color here was because in various writings, including this week's Parsha, as we're going to see, there's colors come up, and colors are associated with these different things in the Torah, and sometimes different colors, so you can't always say, well, this is always that color, because sometimes it's a different color, something you're talking about, because you might be talking about a different concept at that time. So here, the world that we would call our world, or Earth, it's red, Adam is red, like the red ground, the red soil. So the color red is associated generally with the physical world. And then the next one's purple, but I'm going to skip ahead to Berea. Berea is blue in a lot of text, and it's kind of meant to make you think of the skies, but it's not the sky. It's not the sky or the clouds; those are physical. But it's meant to, make you think of above and beyond. And when you mix red and blue together, you get purple, which is called the mixed world, as I mentioned earlier, the mixed realm of Yetzirah. So you're going to see that red, purple, and blue come up in different things in the Tanakh, and then also in the various Torah literature. And generally speaking, the world beyond creation is usually, not always, but usually associated with the color gold, the world of Atzilut. But we'll put that one on hold for the moment. All right, so this is Jacob's ladder. So Jacob's ladder gives us that look at these 4 worlds of existence, including the bottom 3 of creation, and the fact that we have these angels up and down going back and forth in that realm that's in between. And I don't know if this is getting ahead too far, but that concept of that middle world, Yetzirah, that world is said is going to be vanish one day. It won't be needed anymore. When all is one, it will be pointless to have these angels providing communication and all back and forth, or the other entities that exist in there that aren't always the friendliest, etc. So that world's actually going to disappear one day. In this text, we can talk about some other night on that, which is an interesting concept. All right, here we go. So we're going to go back to the Parsha name, TZAVSA, which is the name of this week's Parsha, though the one that we just went through, sorry. And the root word to this is the word TZAVSA, to connect, to make a connection. So if you stop and think, you've got these different worlds, we call them, right? The world of Asiya, the world of Yetzirah, Berea, and then beyond to Atzilut. Atzilut means the higher one of the four means to be nearness. And so you have the idea here. Obviously, it sounds like a path, right? It sounds like different levels. And here we are down here, and God's at the other end. So it kind of implies that there's a path in between, and it kind of also implies, therefore, that there's the idea of making a connection to God through these levels or through these worlds, which is exactly the whole purpose and point of the Bible, is to give us ways to better connect to God and become more like the image of God, as it's called, the B'Tselem Elohim, as Elohim is used in that, by the way. That comes from the first chapter of Genesis. So the idea that there's a model, if you will, for us to kind of strive toward is tied to this idea that there's a path. Now, what's interesting here is in this Parsha, we have several things that do come up with the priest and the people and all of that. And three of those are the idea of offerings, prayer, and incense. They all come up here in different ways. And what's rather amazing is, again, you wouldn't get this from looking at the English, right? But the word for offering, carbonot, is from karev, which means to come near. So that's implying, you get near somebody, you're going to make a connection. Tefillah, I was looking this up one day, and I went on to askmoses.com, so I have to do more research, but I pulled this right off a pretty kosher site here. And Tefillah, the Hebrew word, means also connection. So I was like, wow, that's pretty neat. And then keteret, the incense, actually is a word that means connection as well, from the Aramaic. So you have three different things in this Parsha, three different words that all have to do with connecting to God, which is, again, if you're reading just the English, it's not something you would, that would catch your attention, All right. I'm going to leave my little electronic guy here. I know you just love these cheesy graphics I used. Oh, come on. Let's see. Here we go. Now we're going to get fun. All right. So we're going to go further with these ideas. And again, maybe everybody okay with it so far? We'll pause here for a second. Before we jump here to the next level of the discussion? Are we all good with what we've talked about so far? Please take the mic or type something otherwise. Seems like everybody's reasonably happy. Okay. All right. So precept upon precept. So we're going to go a little further here with those three things we just talked about. Ketoret, the incense, tefillah, prayer, and carbonot, the offering. And in Torah literature, these are associated with what are called levels of the soul. So the soul in Judaism is considered to have different parts or levels to it. And so again, you have that same idea of connecting one to the other and getting closer to God, because our souls kind of, you could say, are what connect us to God. They're part of us. They're part of God, if you will. And you have, generally speaking, well, no, actually, I shouldn't say it that way. Generally speaking, we're primarily dealing with these three levels of the soul, although there are five. And the reason that's the case is because, well, I'll just explain it. The basic level of the soul is the nefesh, and every human being walking around, you can point to, say, yep, they got a nefesh. Everybody's got the nefesh. It's the basic level of the soul that keeps you going and sustains you and makes you, think about, making sure you take care of your, food and everything like that. It's a very basic level of the soul. And people living at the level of nefesh are your completely non-spiritual people. They're here to, get what they can out of life. They're here to, make money. They're often, drawn to materialism, because what else is there? Or sometimes worse. Sometimes they get into terrible, bad things, and because life is boring. So people at the level of nefesh just are, you could kind of say, unfortunately, are very non-spiritual. Then the next level, in this level is the middle one. It's called ruach, and ruach is like, it does mean air or spirit, if you will. And this level here is, if you remember what I said a few minutes ago, the second world of Yetzirah is called the mixed realm. It's kind of a mixture of things. So corresponding to that, this is the level where a human being might start thinking a little bit more about life. Maybe this isn't all there is to it, feeding my face every day. And where somebody starts thinking about spiritual things, starts contemplating them, starts looking at things, starts, studying, starts struggling. It could be anywhere in there. As soon as they cross that line from being non-spiritual into being curious, we're talking about someone that's dealing at this level of ruach, okay? And the Vav gives you that idea, too, that it's a hook, that it's the potential here to connect you to something higher and better and not just be a materialistic person, okay? And then the third level of soul, and again, these are not meant to be physical representations. We just have to do it that way because that's how we function or how we think. The third level, neshama, is the level where you could say the person actually makes the spiritual connection. So they went from being non-spiritual, that level of nefesh, to being curious and checking things out, the level of ruach. And that level of ruach, some people they just fall right back, right? They just, I tried something and it didn't work for me. They go back to being a non-spiritual person. So it's a very transitionary level. So then you have this higher level called neshama, which you're actually making some kind of connection. Now, it's not the same for everybody. Everybody's different. Everybody grows up in different, parts of the world, different cultures, different access to things. So it's, let me get rid of this thing. Got to pay attention for that silly box that comes up. So neshama is that higher level where someone's making a connection to God. So when somebody does this, and you could call them in Judaism like a Baal Teshuvah, somebody that returns to the path of God and they're on it, or there's a term born again in the New Testament text. It's making a kind of connection. So somebody that actually makes a connection to God, their own personal connection. We're not implying any type of specific, what does it exactly mean, but it's someone that is making a connection and living their life differently with God in the equation. And that's kind of the highest level for most people in this life, and that's great. If you make some kind of spiritual connection, that's wonderful and awesome. You're a much better person for yourself and others, etc. And we can leave it at that. It's a good thing. And then there are some people who go beyond that into a higher level of soul. We can talk about that later. These are very rare people that are connected at a higher level, kind of like, their feet don't touch the ground. They kind of float around. So, and these three levels of the nefesh, dealing again with, if you go back to the quote from Deuteronomy, is down at the bottom, love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, and your means. Again, the color coding is there for a reason. So the nefesh is your means or your strength or your money, whatever it takes to, do good things. And then the ruach is the purple, the connection in the middle, that's your heart. And then your soul is related to the blue, neshama, for the color coding. The other interesting thing here too is these areas of prayer and which is the heart, and study, which is the soul or mind, and doing good deeds, which is the means or strength. These are actually, if you will, three remedies, three ways to fix different things that are bothering you. And when you're fixing things like that, you are drawing closer to God. You're actually fulfilling the purpose of this verse of loving God in this way. So I always say, if you are someone who is dealing, for example, with being depressed, being down, one of the best things you can do, and other people will tell you this, even non-religious people, is get up and go do something nice for someone else. So dealing with the nefesh and depression is that level of doing a kind act for someone else, for helping you repair that. And then you might have a problem with negative emotions, particularly anger. If anybody did the Ushpizin movie study in the fall, which we'll repeat, that was a big thing here at prayer. Prayer is that remedy to anger when you find yourself just getting infuriated at people or a person. The idea here for fixing that is prayer. It's the level of emotion. And then lastly, there's another area which differs for people, and it can mean different things, is like an area of temptation where your mind is going where it shouldn't go. And this is when you need to redirect it with some deep Torah study with your soul and your mind. So you can look at these three things at fixing three major areas in us: temptation and negative emotion like anger, and then depression. So it's a good basic prescription for what's ailing you. I'm sorry if I'm missing things in the text. Is this all in 13 petals? No, this is not exactly. I pulled from a bunch of stuff for this current one, so I'll put this up there later, though, Rebecca. And I'll put the whole audio thing here, or the part I remember to record. All right, so what we did here on the right is we have this lovely image of a person, of a man, and we put the 4 letters of the 4-letter name of God. As we showed earlier, we had them vertical earlier in the block text, and now we're putting them over this image of a man. So the image of God, or the how we relate to God and think of the God in terms of what these things represent, relates to us as a person in terms of, if you look, it's kind of neat because you have like the idea of the yud and the mind and all that, and then you kind of go below and you've got the arms and the heart, and then you got the spine connecting everything, right? Your spine runs up and down, connection, the vav, and then the 2 legs. So it's a pretty neat little thing that these 4 Hebrew letters actually form this. And this diagram, by the way, like many others, is well, this one's not as bad as some others. It's backwards, because in the diagram, you'll see this a lot. You'll see the feet, like the image of the person's facing you, and that's incorrect. The image of the person's supposed to be facing the other way, because it's the image of God you're looking on, and you don't see the face of God. You see the back of God. So, and that makes a difference too when you're talking about the right and the left, because the right will be on your right as you face it, but that would be the man's left if he's facing you, correct? So he's not. He's facing away from you. So that way the right corresponds to your right. So just a little thing if you ever get confused by a diagram like this. But hey, when you're on the internet searching, you find what you can, right? All right. Excuse me. I'm grabbing a throat lozenges. Are we still good? I'm so sorry if I missed some things. Put the volume up loud, Nettie. I'll keep going because this is going to get, this is basic stuff in the Torah. We're going to get into some weird stuff later. All right. Let's see. Okay, so that soul level, we talked about this, that 4th world before creation. We'll just briefly mention it here because it will come into the discussion. As we mentioned, the neshama is the 3rd level of the soul. So for the individual, this is like your high level of consciousness of connecting to God. And this is the 3rd level of the soul. But then there's a level past that, and the level of the soul is called chaya. It means life, like you see the little chai letter on necklaces a lot. And this is that level that's before creation, and it's very unified level. Remember, the yud is kind of just that one small yud where everything's in there. So this is the level, if you will, where all of us, all of humanity, but especially all spiritually minded people kind of are connected there. And we'll come back on that later. But so this 4th level of the soul called Chaya, just for now. All right, now we get fun, all right? Because one of the things taught in a number of texts, and I don't usually dwell much on the New Testament in these studies, so tonight this is just a couple of references because they are very pertinent. But there's a couple verses that speak of the body, our human body, being likened to the temple itself. And throughout traditional Jewish Torah kosher literature, you see this, that there's the structure of the 4 letters together, especially when they're put in this kind of arrangement vertically, parallels the setup of the temple, or the tabernacle, if you will, but this is a temple diagram. It's even more precise. So we have the temple diagram here in this particular presentation. And so if you kind of follow the lines across, I guess we could start at the top. The concept of that world of Atzilut, that's that higher world before creation, and that 4th level of the soul, Chaya, stuff that's like outside the bounds of creation, but still within existence, relates to the Holy of Holies, inside the inner area of the temple, which only the high priest could go on special occasion, and that will be significant, actually. And then you go to the next level, Beriah, which is the world of creation, the highest level of creation, and that higher level of the soul called Neshama, and this is related to the rest of the holy place inside the building. And then below that, you have Yetzirah associated with Ruach, which is the inner courtyard, and then Asiya Nefesh is related to the outer courtyard. And you'll see this in literature. So you just kind of think you can keep in mind going forward whenever you're reading diagrams or descriptions, I should say, of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, of the Beit HaMikdash. You can see Oh yeah, I remember now this relates to this level of the soul or this part of creation or et cetera. So you start making those kind of connections and it adds a whole other dimension to what you're reading. Again, pause me anytime. I got like 30 slides here, so I'm not taking too long on these things, and I will post it later. So now you know what I was doing all week. All right, here's one we used before. This looks pretty intense, but we're only going to look at a couple parts. The same idea here that you have these different levels. Remember, I color-coded it. That's why it makes it easier to deal with. So if you look across the bottom from left to right, you have that world of the physical world we live in, and then the mixed world is the purple, and then the blue, then the gold. And then there's a fifth world. Remember I said at the very beginning of the presentation, if you weren't here or didn't get recorded, this is a template of 4 we're discussing, but there's a hidden part. And the way this hidden part is understood is that in that little letter Yud, you actually put the pen or the quill down on the paper first, and you make this little tiniest little dot first, and then you do the little hook. So that little tiny dot is considered this mystical hidden fifth level, this fifth element, if you will. There's a movie by that name, by the way, and it's actually it actually relates to this. So this whole idea that this is hidden, mysterious fifth world that is outside the bounds of existence. So, we have existence, we have creation, there's something even before existence in terms of, us trying to comprehend. So we'll leave it at that for now, but that's why there's a white row going across from left to right. So I don't know if you can see my cursor, but if you look, we're going to talk about these in a second here. If we're going to go back to the Parsha and look, there are some colors and things that come up. And these things I know we were talking about, well, let's start on the right. Everything should go right to left, right? Actually, I'll start on the left. There's the letters here, right? The YHVH, but you have the cusp of the Yud I just explained, and the Yud, and the first Hey, the Vav, and the second Hey. That's down the left, furthest left, okay? And as we talked about a minute ago, the temple, you have the 2 courtyards, the outer one and the inner one, and the sanctuary, the Holy of Holies. And then, of course, there's something beyond the Holy of Holies, which is, aspect of what we call God himself. So, again, that's that mystical thing. We'll skip Betzalel for now, but his name's a whole book and study on this, and the Betzalel with him being in the spirit of God and wisdom and understanding and all those things that correlates to these levels. Called by name, the spirit of wisdom is here in the gold area. The spirit of understanding is in the blue area, and so on down there. It's another one of those interesting parallels. In terms of Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, you have the the children of Israel, then the Leviim, and then within the tribe of Levi, you have the priest, the Kohanim. Within the priesthood, you have the Cohen Gadol, and then closely related but more mystical than that, because Cohen Gadol's, here and was here, and you could, talk to him and poke him in the ribs or whatever. You have the idea of Mashiach, which is more mystical in terms of levels, if you will, of the children of Israel. Let's skip over here. Oh yeah, this is Betzalel I just mentioned. Spirit of God, wisdom, understanding, and so on. The high priest's vestments are also correlate to these areas. And here's actually the ephod. The high priest had an ephod garment, which is gold, blue, purple, and red, if you look in the text. So anyhow, you can see, and I have a huge chart on 13 petals that has over 100 rows like this of how things connect between these five, if you will, 5 levels, all based around the name YHVH. So this is still our template of 4 we talked about, with the hidden 5th level up here, the cusp. But what I'm saying here is when you start looking at these things in the Torah and the Tanakh or any Torah literature you read, you can understand that these things are all share some type of characteristics across these rows. That there's a relationship between going side to side is a relationship between the color gold and the wisdom and the Holy of Holies, and you'll see this. And again, it adds a whole other dimension to what you're reading in the text when you start making these kind of connections. Which again, we go back to what this whole study in Parsha is about. It's about making these different types of connections here. All right, I'm going to go. All right, so I'm going to pause here for a second. I'm going to take a 1 or 2 minute break here. And just if anybody wants to take the mic with a comment or question or run to the bathroom or get a drink, let's do that, because we're going to go into the next section. We're going to change from the this template of four idea, and we could go on all night. Believe me, this is not all there is to it. This is just an overview of some of the ideas that there's these worlds that, kind of between us and God that exist. And we live in this physical world, but we connect to the spiritual worlds. The human soul connects all across these things. Animals don't, plants don't, only humans do. And so this whole idea of, below and above in the worlds, and each of these worlds has its own inhabitants, but there's also some commonality between them in terms of how things function, which is the next section we're going to look at. So I'm going to be quiet for a minute here. If anybody wants to take the mic, otherwise, like I said, I'm going to give it a couple of minutes here quietly and just potty break, cookie break, whatever you want. Throat lozenge break. Oh, yeah, I've got a few left. That's good. So I've got a few of these charts like this. I'm just talking, don't worry if you're in the other room and you hear me, don't worry. I'm just kind of filling time gap here, I got a number of charts like this that are all cut away from the master chart. The master chart is on the 13 petal site. Like I said, it's got all over 100 rows. I started doing this, almost 20 years ago. The first one I did had 4 rows. I was so excited, 4 whole rows. And every time I'd pick up a book and read, and some rabbi would say, these concepts relate to the 4 worlds or relate to the other things, that are in the 4 worlds, I'd be, I got to add another row. So that original chart of 4 rows, like I said, is now way over 100 rows of all of these things that exist across these levels, and gives us the ability to interconnect things. So when you talk about one thing, you can look at something else in the same level and say, there's some kind of relationship here. There's some type of connectivity, because everything is connected, and everything's connected through the 4-letter name of God. That's why I called it on the beginning slide, the trunk of the tree. I don't know if you saw that, but if you stop and think of a tree, it has roots underground, you have branches, you have smaller branches and leaves and all that, but the trunk, when you see that trunk, that's the tree, and everything emanates from the trunk. The roots emanate below, and then the branches and so on. So the trunk is what everything connects to. So if you will, it's an amazing thing to think about. But if you think of that concept of 6 degrees of separation, there was I don't know what it was, an article or about that years ago, how things are connected around the world through no less than 6 steps. But really what the Torah stuff is more like, it's almost like 2 degrees of separation, because everything connects back to that 4-letter name of God and what those concepts mean. So if you have, thing over here on the left and it's talking about something and it relates to the Vav, and you have a thing over here on the right and it relates to the Vav, then those two things have some type of relationship between themselves, because they both relate to the Vav, which is the concept of connection and the hook and all that stuff. So it's a great template to always keep in mind. One of the 2 great templates. We're going to look at the other one in a minute. The 4 levels with the hidden 5th level. Y'all are pretty quiet here tonight, so I'm gonna resume in a minute here. I'm gonna give everybody a fair moment to find their box of cookies and soda, whatever they want. Yeah, it's amazing how important something so simple as the 4-letter name, and the hidden 5th realm. It's like, how complex can things be? But there's so many things associated with it, and then that enables you to associate to like everything else in some way. So, all right. So we're going to move to the second section of this study. The first section, as I said, dealt with these 4, the template of 4, which is based on the 4-letter name of God, and also like the idea that there's these 4 worlds of existence. Just to recap real fast, you have the physical world we're in, which has spirituality or wouldn't exist, but we're living primarily physical in the 5 senses. Then you have that world like Jacob's ladder dream, where the angels go up and down. That's that mixed world of connection to the higher spiritual world, which is the heavenlies, which is the throne room of God, and forces and powers and things of that nature. And then beyond that, there's a 4th world called nearness, meaning like nearness to God, the world Atzilut. And then there's even a fifth level or world. It is called a world in some texts, which is outside of existence, something we can barely comprehend, yet there's actually some good material written on what that's all about. In terms of study, the fourth, like if you're looking at studying, halakha and ethics, musar, things like that, then you get up to that fourth level. As I think I said at the beginning, Kabbalah is at the fourth level. It's the level outside of creation that kind of describes how things work within creation, the spiritual nuts and bolts, if you will, which is what we're doing here. We're looking at, words and diagrams and lines and circles and all this great stuff. There's much more to it than that, but this is essentially what it's provides that framework. And then the fifth level is actually associated with what's called Hasidus or Hasidic Judaism, which is taking, it's kind of like it's even more unified than the subject of the Yud. It's that mystical little tiny spot, which is everything in there, all the concepts and everything that runs through all the four worlds below it emanates from there. So it's an even higher level of understanding. So I might give you like this technical stuff tonight, but like Elisheva would come in and start talking about something even above the technical, more matters of intellect and emotion and everything else, but at an extremely high and deep level that permeates through the Kabbalah and all the teachings of halakha and musar and midrash and all that stuff. So, all right, so let us continue. So we are going to go to this one. We looked at the template of 4. Now we're going to look at the template of 10. I did mention at the beginning that sometimes we also look at a template of 7 that's part of this, and I'll explain why in a minute. So this idea here, a minute ago, we looked at the different worlds of existence, but there's certain things that exist in each of these worlds, namely God, if you will, exists in all of these worlds. But when we're contemplating, from our perspective, God in the physical world here versus the angelic world versus the heavenly world, how we think of God in each of these levels or worlds is very different. So the characteristics or emanations of God have some degree of similarity, like you can have something very general, like something like expansiveness, God, expanding things or contracting things. So that can exist in each world. But all right, here's a good example. If I say that I'm close to you, right? Well, that could mean that I'm driving my car to your house, and I'm in your neighborhood, and I'm close to you. So I'll be there any second. It could mean I'm close to someone, meaning that we shared a life together. It might be my wife or daughter, and I'm close to them emotionally. Very different thing. So there's some similarity in terms of a proximity, but it's not like measured in feet or yards or meters or miles. It's emotional closeness. And then, you could have, you could be reading a text about engineering or physics or something and say, oh, well, Professor so-and-so's work is close to Professor whoever's work, meaning that, the ideas they're coming up with and theories and all of that resemble each other. So there's a different type of closeness there. So if you stop and think, I think that's a pretty good example. If you stop and think of closeness in terms of there's some similarity, but it's different, if you're talking physical, emotional, or intellect. So think of that through those different worlds of existence, that you can talk about God or something being close or this or that, but it's not going to be the same exact meaning from one to the other. So what we're looking at here is that there's this structure of 10 characteristics of God or emanations of God as far as we can understand. They've been grouped together by people a lot smarter than you or me. And these emanations are called Sephrot, a lot of spheres or circles. They get a lot of nicknames in literature, in Jewish Torah literature. But basically, there's these ideas that these 10 ways we can think about God, relate to God, 10 ways we can understand God doing things from God's perspective, if you will. Again, I'm trying to, you don't want to be too specific when talking about these things in general, because people will get the wrong impression. You say, well, this Sephirah means this, and then a person might say, oh, it always means that. No, it doesn't always mean that. It could mean something a little different. So try to be a little loose here. Hang on loosely, like that song used to go. So you have this idea of these 10 emanations of God that have been put into a structure. This structure is actually called a tree of life, or Etz Chaim. That's another term you see in the Torah and other places. So in this particular instance, because it enables us to connect to God through understanding these emanations of God, it's called the tree of life, just as the Torah is called the tree of life, because this is Torah. It's all part of Torah. So this is the beginning of the second section, if anyone just joined, and this is all being recorded. 99% of it is. And we'll have it available, but stick around if you can, because we want to entertain questions and ideas too. So the 10 Sephirot, these 10 emanations, are actually mapped out. And they're mapped out like this for a reason. And the structure itself, when you look at it, has certain things that are important. I'm going to use my little drawing tool here. Oh, here we go. Draw a box. Let me click here, see if this works. Okay, good. So you can view the diagram, first of all, there's 10 spheres, or 10 Sephirot. Sometimes you'll see in the middle here, I don't know if you can see that. Let me draw with a circle here too. Sometimes you'll see a diagram and there'll be a circle in the middle here, and it'll be dotted or look different than the others. And there's a reason for that. That particular one's called da'at, or knowledge. And the reason it's left that way is generally you're talking about either this one at the top, which is the crown or keter, or you're talking about knowledge, and not both at the same time. And the simplest explanation for that is when you're talking about things from God's perspective, looking at us, we're talking about crown and keter. When you're talking about us trying to figure our way back to God, you're talking about knowledge, or a da'at. So that's why you'll sometimes see a dotted 11th one, to let you know that it can be part of the equation if you're talking about us going back to God, as opposed to like creation, this way, God creating and coming toward us. So that's just why, just a basic thing about the structure there. Let's see if my undo thing works. Oh, yes, it does. So there's two ways to look at the structure. One is vertically, one's horizontally. That sounds pretty simple. We'll take the easier way of the two, and we'll look at the, what am I trying to say here? The columns, that's right, up and down. So when you have the columns, you have this bunch, and I hope you can see these lines okay. I could make them thicker. You have a bunch on the left here, and then you have a bunch on the right here, and of course you have a middle column. And it's pretty intuitive here. If you might think, well, a left or right in the middle, that makes kind of sense. So that gives you the idea that there's opposing things, if you will. Not necessarily, that's not always the right word, but there's a left and a right and a middle balance. And that's the case generally when you look at these things, the structure. And everything on the left generally has some association with the idea of restriction, or what you might call the side of form, when you give something form, right? And the side on the right here, let me get here, the side here on the right, I don't know if you can see, I'll go back to my mouse cursor here. Oh, whatever. The side on the right is considered the side of force, or the side of expansion, if you will. So you have one side expanding and one side contracting or restricting. Pretty basic concept that can be applied to all kinds of things. And the middle is basically an idea of things in balance, if you will. There's a certain idea of balance, and I guess I'll use that word for now. Like I said, don't worry, we're going to record all this. So, all right, so I'm going to see if my little undo tool works well. Oh yeah, it does. So that's the left to right. Okay, left. Before getting to like particular names, too specific. Let's start with some general ideas of force on the right, expansion, making something happen. But at some point, you got to say, "Well, that's enough." It's like you go pour your coffee. That's on the right, but if you keep pouring it, you're not paying attention. If you don't have the left, and stop at some point, and then when you do, and it's just perfect, it's the middle, it's balanced. We just leave enough room for cream, So that's the idea of force and the form and the middle, right? So right can be mercy, left can be judgment. Again, it depends what we're talking about. Sometimes the right is other things, or left. But I'm keeping it like the most general concept. So before we talk about something specific like mercy and judgment, we're talking about a more general conceptualization of something that's giving versus restricting. So yes, out of giving and restricting, you might think of like loving kindness or mercy, and on the opposite side, judgment. But we're starting general first, so before getting into like too many specific things. Okay, so the other thing too here, next, looking at this thing up and down, so that would be what, vertically? Yeah, I'm using the right words. So you have what you would call triads, or groups of three. Here's your Jewish Trinity, folks. And you have an upper triad here. Ooh, I made it blue. That's pretty cool, right? I hope everybody sees that. That's neat. So you have this upper triad, and these terms here are chokhmah, which is wisdom, bina, understanding, and above is the crown, keter. And they're considered kind of above and beyond our day-to-day existence. In fact, everything associated within creation is the bottom seven. If you heard me say earlier, there's an aspect of seven that we pull out of the 10. Well, that's when we're dealing with things strictly within our world, our lives, and creation. Like when you do the Omer count in the spring after Passover, you do 7 weeks, and each week has 7 days of attributes. Or in the fall, Sukkot, you do the 7 days of Sukkot, and you study things particular to each of those days. Those are within creation. But there is obviously something above and beyond, and that's these upper three. They're actually called the mind or the brains of God, mochin. That hurts my throat. And so they're kind of like the overarching thing that kind of gives us some semblance of the higher archetypes or levels of the structure. So we do talk about them now and then. We do relate things back to them, but they're not as much as our day-to-day existence. You'll see them pop up once in a while in the text of the Tanakh or other Torah literature, but not as much as like the lower seven. So, but they're there. So that's these three, okay? And as I said before, if you're talking about heading back to God, connecting back to God, you would not include the top one of Keter. It would be hidden away, and you'd have one below it, below Chokhmah and Binah down here, and that would be knowledge or Da'at. And if you're not familiar with that, there's a Jewish, Orthodox Jewish group called Chabad, and Chabad is the acronym for Chokhmah, Bina, and Dat. So Chokhmah, Bina, and then Dat would be down here. So that's where the word Chabad comes from. It's the first letters of those three terms, of these three sephirot, when you include Da'at. Okay? And again, we'll pause at the end of this diagram because we're kind of going through a lot of things here, if you're not familiar. The next group here is actually this group of six, if you will. They're actually considered a unit, but they're broken into two, as we'll see in a minute. And there's an upper three and then a lower three. And this upper three, they're all considered midot, or emotional attributes. But these are these top three here, which are chesed on the right, and then gevura, or sometimes called din, on the left. So that's a loving kindness, or sometimes called mercy. It gets a little tricky with the English here. Gevura is judgment. And then in the middle, teferet is a sense of balance between the two, or a sense of balance in terms of harmony. And it's actually, the word means beauty, but it means beauty in that sense that everything's beautiful. Everything is beautiful. You know that song? Doesn't apply at all, but anyhow. So we got Tiferet is the balance between these two. And Tiferet is also known as Rachamim, or compassion, or sometimes called mercy, which not to be confused with when you use the term mercy on the right. So I use mercy on the right a lot. I kind of grew up with more of that. But it's also called loving kindness. And when it is, then Tiferet is called mercy. The idea here is you have a judge in court, and something's presented before him, and he could be strict, he could be merciful, and when he reaches the proper balanced decision, it's Tiferet, it's beautiful. Okay, and these three are part of, we called midot, or emotional attributes. There's three of the ones we study in the Omer count, but they connect us more this direction, back to Chokhmah and Binah. So they're kind of like looking back to our roots, very close to God. And these three are associated with Abraham over here on the right, and Isaac on the left, and Jacob in the middle, who were very much associated. What we learned from them is they have just their little family and friends, and it's mostly a deeper level of connectivity to God we're studying. So we are studying their emotional type attributes, but kind of looking back toward God. Whereas the next set of three here, which the patriarchs associated with these three are Moses on the right at Netzach, and Aaron on the left at Hod, and then Joseph here in the middle at Yesod. And if you notice, if you think of their lives, Joseph, both Aaron and Moses, as well as Joseph, and chronological doesn't mean a thing here, remember that. It's really irrelevant. But Moses, Aaron, and Joseph dealt with large numbers of people, right? You have, Joseph's dealing with all the Egyptians and the tribes of his big family. Moses and Aaron are the same thing. They're dealing with large numbers of people, both Hebrew and not Hebrew. So if you think in terms of that, you're thinking now in terms of a lot of interpersonal relationships. So these three Sephirot are also part of that six-pack in the middle. But these three tend to be looking more, not so much like back toward God like these are, but toward our fellow man, if you will, our fellow humans, to how we relate to them. But they all function together as kind of a group of six. And we'll cover some of the names for that in a bit, okay? So you have the upper three, which are intellect, brains of God. Then you have the second set of three, which are more emotional attributes, higher level emotion. And then you have the lower three here, which are more emotion in terms of actually what we do, how we put it into play. If you go on Aish, A-I-S-H, Aish.com, Aish calls these three, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, Aish calls them tactical Sephirot. Sounds very militaristic, doesn't it? Tactical Sephirot. So these are how you take your emotions and put them into the real world with people. Interesting term they use. And the one at the bottom, and this is like Eeyore and Winnie the Pooh, actually it is Malkut. Malkut means kingdom, and Malkut is associated very much with the actual world we live in. So if you stop and think, it's at the bottom. All of these kind of flow down into it. So you get that concept that Malkut has everything within it. And we're going to show how interesting that is in a minute. Malkut, because it means kingdom. And if you remember, Keter has to do with a crown. They both relate to a king. Okay. So there's a crown above the king and the kingdom that belongs to the king. So there's a sense of connectivity here between the highest Keter and the lowest Malkut. And there's a verse in a book called Sefer Yetzirah that says the end is in the beginning and the beginning is in the end. It's like a loop, if you will. And if you get the idea of we're kind of down here and God's kind of up here, I mean, that's a very poor way to say it, but if you just in a primitive sense and you got all these things in between, you get that same idea almost like we did with the four worlds on the other template, that there's a path to negotiate from below to above to connect to God. And as I said, these 10 Sephirot exist in all four of the worlds of existence. So when we talk about the physical world, there's some aspect of these 10 that is functioning. When we talk about the world of angels, it's the same. In the world of the heavenly realm, it's the same. And even the world beyond that, which is the world of a greatly unified world outside creation, they're there in a sense that we can understand them as separate entities within one thing. So anyhow, this is Malkut. What else can I say here? King David is associated with Malkut in terms of the patriarchs. So you go back over here. I don't know if you can see the cursor. Does anybody see my little cursor, or do I need a different cursor? I'm kind of spinning it around Chesed here now. Okay, so on the right, middle one here with the three letters in the middle row, Chesed is Abraham on the left, Geber is Isaac, and then you have Jacob in the middle at Teferet. Moses on the right here, Aaron on the left here, then down to Joseph in the middle, and finally David at the end here. Okay. Oh, you can see it. Awesome. Good. So I can just make you all dizzy by doing this. Okay. So you have this idea we're actually going to come to something else in a minute. I don't want to jump the gun here. So these things exist. The big thing on this slide is to understand that these emanations of God, how we understand God and how God interacts with creation, or we interact with God, exist at every level. We always want to think of that in terms of when we study these different areas, the angelic realm or physical realm, that these things are going to be lurking in the background. They're part of understanding each of those worlds, okay? All right, so let's see if I can move to the next slide. I'm not doing this right. And no, okay. I think I need to get out of this thing. There we go. Okay. Questions, comments? I'll keep going. I'll just keep going. We're getting through some of this stuff here. We're going to come back to the Torah portion here in a second on the next slide, I think. There's just important background stuff to understand. The color coding is going to become important too. I'm focusing just a moment here. This is kind of an extra slide I threw in, but the idea here is that the central one called Tiferet, balance and beauty, has a sense of, as it says in the text here, it's a state of harmony between everything. So when everything's exactly the way it should be, maybe like 5 seconds before they ate off the tree in the Garden of Eden, or one day at the end, when things return to that. So when things are in that perfect state of harmony, and theoretically that can be something like that in the individual. So this stuff applies to the individual as well as the world, of course. So the perfect state of harmony, the word Tiferet has to do with harmony, is represented by that central sephirah. So the whole idea of physically looking at the diagram, and it's in the middle, actually carries some weight to it. And it's, as the text says, if you've been reading, and it's a good book, by the way, by David Ariel. There's a common term used in the Torah and outside of the Torah called Hakadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He. And this is very much addressing, there's no aspect of carving up God here. We're always talking about God as one. But, if we're talking about aspects of God, that whole aspect of everything being in balance is associated with Tiferet, which is associated with Hakadosh Baruch Hu. So when you see that term, you're thinking of God in that perspective, or in that sense, if you will. Okay. The other thing down here too, you'll see this if you have a siddur. You might find this in your siddur. Certain ones. I think I have one that has this in it. It's an Ashkenazi one, and it's a prayer book. And the whole idea, as we said at the beginning of this parsha and this study, is about connections and making connections, and the whole concept here of unifying things. Okay, bringing things together into a state of unity as they should be, because they're not. Everything's a mess and fractured, and that's why we have sin and all these problems. So the whole idea of doing things, and with the intent that what you're doing, a good deed, let's say, or something, or prayer, or a study, that when you do that, you're doing it for distinct purpose. You're not just saying, let's just study because I got nothing else to do. You're doing it. You always want to do things with this distinct purpose of unifying things, okay? And the idea here is there's an actual prayer, like a little one-liner, if you will, that is tradition is to say it in front of doing a good deed, a mitzvah, to focus on the purpose of it. And it goes like this. It says, I hereby do this mitzvah, this good deed, for the sake of the unification of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He. So you're wanting to bring that harmony. Remember, Tiferet is harmony. So you're doing it for the unification of the Holy One, blessed be He. It means everything coming together, and His divine presence. And I'll just finish the verse. In fear and love, to unify the name Yod-He with Vav-He in completion. Now, what you have here is a couple interesting concepts. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we're going to cover that in a minute here, is associated also with the idea of a divine bridegroom, okay? And the king, the bridegroom, even the son, S-O-N. And then you have the idea here of the divine presence, which is, as I said earlier, this world we live in is physical world, but there is spirituality in this world, or it wouldn't exist. So you have to have a spiritual connection to God. So the divine presence within human beings is associated with that sephirah at the bottom here, the one called Malkut. And that is associated with the idea of the bride. And you'll see this in various Jewish Torah texts. Not so much in the Tanakh itself, but in numerous Kabbalistic texts talk about the bride. And it's even mentioned in the New Testament. If you read it correctly, it makes the exact same thing. And it's that concept of what's called the Shekhinah, and which means divine presence. So there's a divine presence within the world and within humans, and especially more so within humans who are following God. So you have here this idea that you're trying to unify the groom and the bride. Your unification here says of the Holy One, blessed be He, and His divine presence, or His bride. So this is the idea of groom and bride. So color coding going forward, purple is associated very much with the groom, because that's that middle six, the world of Yetzirah, right? And red is associated with, red is associated with the presence of God in this world, red Adam, red in this world. So bride and groom becomes a major theme here. And the way the prayer goes is we are focused here with unifying the bride and the groom. That's really our job, of bringing spirituality into the world. So we reach up and elevating the world up into spirituality. That's two ways of expressing how we unite the bride to the groom. And when we do that, the unification becomes is on its way to becoming complete, because the Vav and the Hey, here we are. That's in reverse. Sorry. The Vav and the Hey here. Did I get my color coding right? Yeah, the purple and the red right here. So the Vav and the Hey is really what our job or our concern is making that connection between this world and our lives and spirituality and back and forth. The Yud and the Hey, which are above, and I'll explain what those are in a minute, they actually represent father and mother, Abba and Ima. They're above. They're always, that's not what the problem is, put it that way. Then they're always unified. So we're trying to bring these two together. We're trying to bring the bride and the groom together and get the whole family happy. Father, mother, son, daughter, or groom and bride. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, hold on, time out. You just said son and daughter and groom and bride. That sounds kind of wrong. And it's interesting. Again, as I said earlier, terminology relates to what you're talking to specifically at any given point. And if you look, for example, in Shir HaShirim, in the book in the Torah and the Tanakh called Song of Songs, it trips up people a lot to read that this dialogue between the male and the female, they go from talking about brother and sister to lovers. And it's like, what's up with that? Well, again, it's the same concept here. The presence, the aspect of God that we think about in terms of these six Sephirot, or these that world of connectivity, the one that makes the connection, is I'm sorry, I get distracted. Lost my train of thought. That's the groom, and it's also the son. And when it's being discussed in terms of the general family setup, if you will, or actually the daughter here is talked about as being lost in the world, because that's the aspect of the divine presence is separated, if you will. This is very metaphorically. There's no real separation in God. So the idea of the divine presence is separated from the name, the name, the Yod He Vav He. So that last He is lost in the world with Israel, with people, with humanity, but particularly with Israel. Never leaves Israel, but it's lost in the world and has to be, that's this nice little story, right? It has to be united back to its mate. So anyhow, depending on the context, it's either talking about it in terms of a brother-sister relationship or a bride-groom relationship, but not at the same time generally. All right. Let's go one more here. Boom. Okay. Now it gets fun. Color coding galore here. Everybody still good? Now we're going back to the Parsha for one verse. Interesting verse, and we'll look at a couple more verses in a minute. The interesting verse regarding these garments for the high priest, right? And it says in the text to make holy garments for your brother Aaron for splendor and beauty. Now, beauty is Tiferet. Splendor is a code word, if you will, or nickname of Malkut in Torah literature. I could find you the examples, but this is all from kosher sources, okay? So the idea here, if you reread this differently, as we just said, is Aaron's garments are for the bride and the groom. The purpose of the garments has to do with the bride and the groom, or more specifically, uniting the bride and the groom. So the garments themselves represent the idea of bride and groom and uniting bride and groom. So that's an interesting thing. As I said, you would never know by reading the text, and also not having access to the understanding of sages and the oral Torah and all that. So this whole idea of connection is right there in that first verse. Okay. There is some other stuff below here. I will save some of this to look at later. But what I did, it's funny, I pulled a couple of these other sources out, and or other source from a text called a Tikkun Zohar, and you see the red and purple is color coordinated because it's talking about bride and groom all through the text. And this is the same in many other texts of Torah literature, that you'll find these words that relate to bride and groom, and the whole idea that that's what we're here to do. We're here to unify the bride and the groom, or the bride within us, and that, and God above, and we do that internally, to ourselves, and then help other people do that too. And that goes back to the whole idea of loving God with your heart and your mind and your strength. Those are the things that cause, and not sinning, of course. Those are the things that cause the bride and groom to come together. And, you do it on a personal level and on a level of people that are close to you in your life. And then it hopefully continues through the world to spread in terms of the world getting to that point, hopefully. Okay, so let's move on. Oh, yeah, on the right here. There's a little slide. I was just grabbing stuff on the internet. So you have the 6 Sephirot. As I said earlier, they're actually broken up into 3 groups. And if you take the initials, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, you get the acronym Hagat. That's what that funny little word is. Same below Netzah and Hod in Tiferet, then Hod, then Yesod down below here, and you get Nehi. So you have these 6 working together, and they're like in this context, they're a masculine context of these 6, the groom, and then Malkut is the feminine context down here. As I said before, these things aren't always, depends what you're talking about, because sometimes the whole left side is considered feminine and the right side is considered masculine. It depends what you're talking about. That would be in terms of giving and receiving, or force and form. You would have the right is masculine and the left is feminine. But in this case, when we're talking about the relationship, vertical relationship of groom to bride, all of this is masculine and this is feminine. All right, let's see what's on the next slide, because I'm completely forgotten. And we'll pause again in a bit to take another cookie break. But I can't get this to work, so let's see what's going on here. Why not? Let's just close this. There we go. All right, so now we're going to introduce a concept called partsufim. It's really all it means is personae, different types of ways to understand these little circles and lines, or the Sephirot. And we've already talked about that briefly. Partsufim or personae, most of the time is the idea of Abba, father, Ima, mother, and then either the son or groom, as I said, or the bride or female. There's probably more names for the bride and the daughter than there are for the others. But it's kind of like the heavenly family here, if you will. I mean, you can't have and Christianity would revolt at this because, wait a minute, what's this feminine God stuff? Well, yeah, when we're talking about, we're not ever talking about God. We're talking about how we understand God. And understand God is, we're made in the image of God, masculine, male and female. God made us. And there was only one entity at the time when he said that. So we all have masculine and feminine attributes, as they're called. And it doesn't mean all the boys have the masculine ones. No, we all have all of them. All of those 10 Sephirot exist in everybody. Some men have more caring, nurturing, ways of acting, and some women are more, take charge. And it's things that we would think of as being one more than the other, and depends on your culture, of course. But when we think of masculine, feminine in the Torah literature, it's simply having to do with certain attributes, and not boys or girls or gender in any way. So you have Abba, which correlates. See the color coding again, right? Abba is gold, which is beyond creation, right? It's the aspect of father. Okay. Now we can't really, we can kind of think about God beyond creation, but it's a lot easier to think of God, within creation, and how we relate directly to God more so, okay? Which is why you hear the expression, our Father, which art in heaven. Well, God is obviously everywhere. He's not limited. But the idea of by saying our Father, which art in heaven, is I can now understand God at an even closer level, because I can get what's within creation. I really can't get what's outside of it as well. So that's what's behind that opening verse, by the way, to that. And then you have the idea, of course, if you got a dad and kids, you got to have a mom. It's just the way it is, man, So Ima, there's a divine feminine presence, and those are often seen in the top 2. These are the top 2 Sephirot on the Tree of Life diagram. On the top right is wisdom. Chokhmah is related to Abba and the masculine, and on the left, Bina, understanding, is related to the mother Ima part, feminine. Couple things on this. So Chokhmah, as we talked about earlier, that world, the gold color, that first world outside of creation, we said is very singular, because that little yud letter is very singular. So it's the whole idea that there's only singular, only one, which is also associated with the past, right? We only have one past. And then on the other side is the feminine, understanding, which is taking that one and breaking up into many possible combinations, many possible things. So if you look at husband and wife there, the husband comes home and says, honey, greatest idea in the world. We're all going to go on vacation next month. And he goes up, he goes to leave the room and she's like, whoa, hold on a second. We got to talk about, job, vacation time, the kids, supplies, the car. So she breaks up that brilliant idea he had into pieces that are actually manageable. That's a real simple example, but it works for me. So the idea there too is in Proverbs. I wish I'd written it down. Proverbs 9. Yeah, Proverbs 9, where it says Chokhmah has built her house, and that's interesting because the her is not, and we're going to cover that in a second. The her is the next person mentioned, and she has it on 7 pillars, and that is the idea here of Chokhmah on the right, Bina on the left, and the 7 below, which are the 7 emanations we deal with regularly. So that's in Proverbs 9. So if you want to make a pencil note, I'll add it to this thing later. So someone will ask, wait a minute, isn't Chokhmah feminine? Because wisdom is called feminine in the Proverbs, and probably some other places. Darn good question. So the way that's understood, the way that's explained is when everything is in a perfect state and the world as we know it down here is in perfect harmony. So that whole aspect of Malkut down here in the world is in perfect harmony. Malkut being the daughter or the bride, but let's call her the daughter in this case. So the saying goes, and I'll have to find words from exactly, but the saying goes that when everything is in harmony, when the daughter is connected to the father, because everything's in perfect harmony. So when the very beginning, Chokhmah, is all the way connected perfectly, wonderfully to the end, which is Malkut, she is called by his name. She is called wisdom. So under the circumstance of everything being perfect harmony, Malkut in that circumstance is called by her father's name, which is Chokhmah, which is wisdom. In this case, Chokhmah, wisdom in this Kabbalistic literature, is not so much the idea of being wise, like smart. It has more to do with something being very singular, as the things we've been talking about, those concepts. So it's a different basic definition most of the time than just like a person who's wise because they get some gray hair and they've been around and like me. Just kidding. I have less hair. Okay, so Abba, Ima, and then below we have the idea, of course, the sun, which relates to the Vav. So the sun is the one who makes the connection between above and below and helps restore this, which, of course, is a lot of the themes you see in the New Testament books, that whole idea, whether you like it or not, that's the theme, and that's throughout, I said that's throughout Jewish literature. And then, of course, below the divine presence, the Shekhinah, the bride, kingdom, whatever you want to call it, is the aspect that's down here. So when we're going in reverse, we're talking about starting at the bottom. We're starting with first, connecting with the Shekhinah, the divine presence, which is called kingdom, Malkut, right? So seek ye first, what is the verse? Seek ye first the kingdom of God, the Malkut, okay? And then it says, and then all will be added to you. And one of the if you had a Kabbalistic thesaurus, I guess you could call it, one of the nicknames for the masculine attribute, particularly one right above it called Yesod, is Kol in Hebrew, which is all, A-L-L, all. So it kind of means the idea of once you connect with the attribute down here, then all else, all spirit, you open up your access to all like spiritual things above. So interesting. So these are some texts that I plopped down here. And again, I don't want to, what time is it? I don't want to get everybody too tired. It's 11:15. Wow, that flew by, didn't it? Huh? So I won't spend a lot of time in these other than just maybe pick up, again, the color coding is huge. So when you see, so a couple terms to define here. So this term called Ze'ir, it's a weird word up here called Ze'ir on pin. That's the strangest term I've ever seen, probably for you too. And this correlates to the 6 in the middle, or the son of the groom, if you will. And Ze'er and pin means lesser countenance or lower face. So it's an idea of a reflection of what's above down in our reality. And then nukva is actually a term that just means female. And it's just another way of referring here to the Shekhinah, or the divine feminine presence in the world. So another way of saying groom and bride, that's all I'm alerting you to here. And so they're color-coded. Purple and red. And then here, some other text from this other book here, again, talking about the significance of the groom and the bride and how that's really what we're focused on and what, our reality is meant to be about and what we're connecting. And then this interesting quote down here I found from Ariel Bar-Zadok, who's, if you're not familiar with him, he's totally crazy and awesome. And he says, man, specifically Israel, is zir and pin here on earth. We are the groom on earth, although we're not God. We're created in his image of the Son. So that's interesting, as that sounds pretty familiar for people who might read certain texts as well. Okay, let's go to the next one here, and we'll take a break in a second before we get to the last part and the weird stuff. I just got to get my darn thing to work here. There we go. So this is some more text here. I'll just probably highlight a couple things here. Okay, so divine masculine, divine feminine. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about these things. Rachel and Leah are important characteristics, as you know. Jacob had 2 wives, very significant. Jacob is associated with that middle sephira of Tiferet, of harmony. And 2 reasons. One, because from left to right, he had Abraham's giving, wonderful, expansiveness, and he had Isaac's restriction on the left. So he was balanced between his father and grandfather. And then above and below, the other direction, he had a very physical attraction, if you will, to Rachel, and she is placed at Malkut below. She's the lower feminine. And then Leah, the sister, is considered the upper feminine. She is at Binah, if you're going to place these characters on the map, so to speak. They associate too with the idea of Jerusalem above, Jerusalem below. You'll see that in some texts. Jerusalem below, physical Jerusalem, is associated with Rachel and Malkut and all that. And Jerusalem above, which is called Mother to us all, if you're familiar with that text, is the divine mother above, Ima. So yeah, when you read Galatians, that's a very Kabbalistic verse in Galatians that talks about Jerusalem above is free and mother to us all. I have an unstable internet connection too, so if I drop, I'll come back. So whatever that means. All right, let's see if it's time to stop yet. Last one, Exodus 28:2-8. This is why the color coding is so important. If you look in this week's Parsha, and you see this whole idea, as we talked about the first verse for glory and beauty, which is the bride and the groom. And then what you'll see in the text below is it goes on 3 times to describe the colors blue, gold, purple, and scarlet that are built into the garments of the priest and then the ephod and all. So those represent the 4 worlds of existence that the priest is connecting on behalf of the people. He's making the connection between these worlds, between us and God. And I think we're going to pause it for 1 more minute. Then there's a few more slides, which is the crazy stuff. So please get a drink, hit the bathroom 1 more time, and we'll look at the really fun, crazy stuff in a minute. And if you have a question or comment, just take the mic. Thank you for sticking around. There's about 9 of you diehards here, or 9 or 10 with me. So appreciate that. Some of this stuff is kind of unusual for some folks, but it's good. It's good to understand the framework, how things work, how they function. I'm just going to go to the next page and tease people. Okay, well, this was one I threw into an extra one. So we mentioned Moses and Aaron, where they fall in here. But what's interesting is, if you remember in the text of the Torah, Miriam was the one that the people were close to. So Miriam played a key role between Moses and Aaron. Miriam was almost like a Messiah ben Joseph figure in terms of the connection she made with the people. And when she passed away, it was a really, really dramatic event compared even to Moses or Aaron. So another thing too, and there's a text here, it's in Chabad, that's the link, and it says that originally Moses would have been the priest, and then Aaron taking Moses' job, and then they flipped, actually. So it just shows you that they're both very closely intertwined. And my voice is starting to go here. Hold on here. Let's see if we're going to get into the... Oh, come on. I'm not sure how to make this thing. It doesn't always behave here. I'm just trying to get it to go to the next page. Here we go. Another verse. I thought it was up to the crazy stuff yet. I'll skip this one, but it'll be in the presentation. I'll save the relationship between Sephirot and prophecy. This, by the way, if you, I'm doing a Revelation study on 13 petals, and that's weird. I'm actually up to chapter 19. Haven't done it yet, and it's has a huge section on this idea that being connected, prophecy. The more you're connected through these things, the more you get close to God through these. Relating to these godly emanations, the closer you hear from God and all that. And at one time in Israel's history, you had people who were declared prophets, and they would have to prove themselves. And these are people who were very, they had their ducks in a row. All right, let me see if we're at the fun stuff yet. I'm going to roll in Path of the Zadik. I had more slides than I thought, so apologize. This has got to be the last one. This is an interesting book cover, and what's interesting is the idea of the Zadik, or the righteous person that helps make the connection between above and below, is associated with a particular one of the Sephirot. Where's my annotating tools? Here they are. Draw a rectangle. So over here, Yesod, as we saw in the other diagrams here. In this particular diagram, you'll see there's only one line going from Yesod down. So you see how critical everything passes through Yesod in this type of diagram. And that goes both ways. So this is where your righteous person, or your Zadik, would be there helping things along between us down here and everything else above. That when there's a strong Zadikim in the world, it's a good thing, or someone can act like a Zadik, and that's a good thing, because they are the point where everything flows through either direction. So if there's something wrong here, there ain't no Zadik, or you're not acting in a righteous manner, you're cutting yourself from all of what's above and stuck down here, and that's not a good thing. All right, let's see if we can go into the weird stuff yet. And I do mean weird because you guys know it's no fun unless it gets crazy. Prayer. Gosh, I keep forgetting I added these slides today. This is a prayer by Aryeh Kaplan, so we can come back to that some other time. It'll be, I'll leave it in the presentation. He actually designed a prayer around the 10 Sephirot, starting at Keter, going down to Malkut here, which is interesting because you'll see different names here of God that are associated with each. So Ehyeh, here, I am, is associated with Keter, up high. Then Yah is wisdom. Elohim, Chaim, which is Elohim, life, is Binah. Then there's El. Then there's another type of Elohim here, which is Geburah, judgment. Then YHVH is actually the central one of Tiferet. Then you have the right and left armies of God, which are YHVH Tzavot and Elohim Tzavot. So this one's on the right, and this one's on the left. And then Yesod here, the one we talk about, is El Chai, or God of life. It's also El Shaddai, God of provision. And then the God named Adonai, when you see Adonai, it's generally talking about the divine presence, or as we relate to God in this world very closely. All right, I am absolutely, if it sounds like I'm running out of steam, I'm coming down with something. We're going to get through this, though, because this is too much fun at the end. I'll have to come back to the questions in a minute. Okay, other connections. Here's the weird part. Oh, I have to make this silly drawing thing go away. There it goes. So here's one, the Shema. This is one I threw in. These are going to be some random weird things, and we can look at later and comment on, so feel free to look at this thing later. I put a lot of text in so you can read it without much commentary. In the Shema, you have these two letters that are unusually large size. One is here. Okay, this is a large oversized ayin. It should be more the size of the letter next to it. And then the last letter here, because it goes right to left, is this baby here, this dalet. And when you take the letters ayin and dalet, it means witness. The word is witness. And when you flip them around, it's da, which like da'at means to know. So that's interesting. Why does the Torah have, now this is all Torah scrolls. This isn't like somebody did this. This is in every Torah scroll. These two letters are unusually large for some reason. So it's pointing something out to us whenever you see things like this in the Torah scrolls. And there's all kinds of weird things in the Torah scrolls. There's sections where the words look like building blocks, and sections like with dots on top of letters for no reason, and all kinds of strange things that are like clues at something else, which is fascinating. So, anyhow, let me go back. Let me go the last few slides here, and so this is anyhow. Yeah, I'll just go to the next one so we can come back. Okay, here's an interesting concept here. We're talking about different templates, and I like Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg. He's a mathematician. He comes up with these weird ideas and stuff. Does a lot of Newton number stuff, gematria and all. And I always caution people with gematria never to try to prove anything with it. It's just really interesting sometimes. So he talks about the idea that the square of a number is the ultimate state of the number, in the Torah. And he does that kind of stuff. So anyway, if you take the idea of the 10 commandments, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 10, you take the square of each number. The square of 1 is, of course, still 1. Square of 2 is 4. Square of 3 is 9, so on. You add all these up, you get 385. 385 is the gematria of Shekhinah. And the idea here, as he teaches, this is fascinating, is here's your first commandment, on the Lord your God, took you out of Egypt, right? Then your second commandment, when you study and learn the second commandment, he says it contains the first one within it, so it's cumulative. When you go to the third one, you're also remembering and containing the first and second within it, and so on. So by the time you get to the 10th one, you've got all of the other 9 cumulative, in your mind, in your heart, and then the 10th one. So everything comes down. You always want to say, oh, well, the first one's kind of the most important because it's about faith, it's about God. Well, that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is by the time you get to the 10th one is loaded. The 10th one, like Malkut, we say everything falls into Malkut at the bottom. Same idea here. Everything falls into that 10th one. So it contains everything in it. So the whole idea of mistreating your neighbor, coveting things that belong to your neighbor, and stealing and all is considered such a vile sin because you're, in a sense, violating all 10 commandments because they're all built into it. This is what he teaches, which is, I find, very interesting. So he's taken that template of 10 and really doing something kind of extremely interesting with it. All right, are you ready for the really crazy stuff? Maybe I shouldn't do this part because you guys are going to all unfriend me. All right, so if I can get it to work. If it doesn't, it means that's Hashem saying, don't do it. Oh, okay. So here's a quote from Rabbi Schneerson, Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, a former, passed away years ago. Very smart guy. And he talks about everything's interconnected. He's a big deal on how, body, mind, and soul, all these things are very interconnected. And he would teach that, if you're having problems in one part of your life and you can't fix it, work on strengthening another part of your life because everything's connected and it'll help heal the first. So that's basically what this slide's about. So what I've found, if you've been hanging around with me for the last few years on Facebook, is that there are things in our world, in our culture, because human beings are all made in the image of God, the things that we produce, the things we build, the art we create, all of this stuff is going to reflect this image of God that we're made in. I'm not saying good or bad here. I'm simply saying that's how our minds, our brains function. We're built this way upon these 10 Sephirot, these 4 worlds, so that everything we produce is going to come out of that reality of being in the image of God. B'Tselem Elohim. Okay? So what that would tell us then is when we look at certain things, they will very much or can very much reflect some of these Torah principles. So like I said, if you've hung around with me a little bit in the last few years, I'm a big Matrix fan, and I utilize the Matrix movies as a vehicle, like a midrashic vehicle, if you will, to point out Torah concepts that are in the movie. And it's not that the people who wrote the script or produced it are religious. They're not at all. They're pretty strange, as a matter of fact. But aside from that, something came out of their minds that is full of these Torah concepts. It's amazing. And when things reflect a lot of Torah concepts, those kind of things become more popular with more people. It just connects with human beings because we're all made in that same image. Another thing I've dealt with and will again this spring is like the Winnie the Pooh characters. Winnie the Pooh is still popular to this day, massively popular across the world in many languages and cultures, etc. And why is that? Well, because the 10 characters is actually 10 main characters that they all exactly mirror the 10 Sephirot, which is a study I've done a little bit on, but we'll kind of expand that with the Omer count this year. So things like that really can catch on. So that's entertainment, but it appears in other areas too. So I was actually listening to my wife, Elisheva, recently, and she's a nurse and going for her master's degree in nursing, and she's reading off some stuff, and I caught a glimpse of something she had in her book, and it's this nursing paradigm. So there was this particular nurse teacher named Betty Newman. And, if you just read the first sentence and think about Rabbi Schneerson's quote on the other page, she had a very a view of human beings that we were all, connected within ourselves at these different levels, and then connected to other people that mirrors what is taught in Torah, amazingly. So there's some words to that effect at the top. And she came up with this model, this Newman's model of nursing down in the bottom left here, where she understood human beings to be connected to 5 different levels, which, if you look at it, what I did on the right is I simply rearranged them because they're not in a particular order. I rearranged them on the right, did our little color coding, and they line up perfectly. They line up exactly in terms of physical, emotional, which is socio-cultural, and psychological and spiritual. And even the idea here of developmental, developmental has to do with something that's going to permeate all of those areas. So developmental actually goes back to the idea of that hidden 5th level where everything is in there, and you extract it to impact all the other areas. So this is a remarkable thing here, that we have this thing in nursing that parallels this. And of course, if you know, I've done a whole thing on Stephen Covey too, in the 7 habits that parallel exactly the 7 lower Sephirot. So these things show up in literature, and the more closely they resemble these concepts, like this nursing paradigm is a big deal. Stephen Covey's book was hugely famous and still is, and Matrix movie, Winnie the Pooh, on and on. The more they resemble these things. Oh, by the way, Nike, the company Nike, their whole marketing campaign. The more they resemble, the more popular they are. The more they're going to resemble these things. And the idea here is, in terms of everything being repaired, tikkun of everything, goes all the way back to the mind of God, where once upon a time, if you will, God was going to had us all in the mind of God to create us, and all the way fast forward to today, to the lowest, most physical, boring, whatever part of our lives. So from one extreme to the other, the term that you see on the right there is, I can't even pronounce it, it's a fish tal shalus, which is like the idea of chains, of everything chained together from one end to the other, is what it is. And that resembles, that speaks to the idea of everything being connected from one end to the other across all the worlds, across all time. And this is very similar to Betty Newman's nursing paradigm here, which I found really quite remarkable. Okay, now it's going to get into the really crazy, weird stuff, the heretical stuff coming up, okay? If I can get my computer to fast forward this. I don't know why it's doing this. It's giving me a really hard time about moving along here. Close this again, see if it does it. I don't know why it won't do this. Here we go. This is from the Matrix movie. Some of you have seen this before. The second movie at the very beginning, when it opens up, has this weird scene where you see this point of light. If you think of the Yud, right? And it blows up like a popcorn kernel does, if you think of that second letter, hey, right? And then it starts to take form, world of formation, right? It starts to turn into something and comes down into the physical world, the 4th one, where the time clock is made. It's a fascinating opening 60 seconds or whatever, but if you ever get the second movie, Matrix Reloaded, and play, it's right at the very beginning. You'll see the scene I marked it 50 seconds, 104, and so on, with these things follow the 4 worlds and the 4-letter name. It's fascinating. Now you got to wonder about what I do with all my free time. Okay, here's the scary one, Harry Potter. As I said, this is not passing good or bad judgment or anything. This is simply saying, wow, look at this. So you have this whole idea of the 4-letter name of God, and of course it goes male, female, the Yod, the Hey, the Vav, and the next one. It's associated in Torah literature. On the left, it's all Torah literature, fire, air, water, and earth. Those are your 4 elements. As I said earlier, there's that idea of the movie of the 5th element. Animals associated with these 4 worlds are in the Torah and the Tanakh, the lion, eagle. Third one's either a man or a serpent, then the ox, and then these colors come up a lot. So you have that in Torah literature. And then when you look at the stuff that Rowling wrote in her books, it's really freaky because, and I kind of color-coded it. Actually, I didn't. The colors you see are actually the colors of the 4 schools. They go, a gold, blue, green, and black. Malkut, the last one, is black or red in Torah literature most of the time. They go male, female, male, female. The physical signs, fire, air, water, earth, match up. The animals are very close: lion, eagle, serpent, and badger. So you substitute badger for an ox. It's a four-legged creature on the ground, the concept of four on the ground, and so on. And you look at these things, and it's just really weird. I mean, extremely weird how these four, what were they called? The four groups or within the school in the Harry Potter movie, how they align, including their behavior and everything. It's just fascinating. This is the heretical stuff, like I said. I think I have one or two more slides. All right, here's the real heretical one, the last one. Okay, so the other aspect here, aside from these things representing themselves in our culture, is looking at other cultures and what has happened. And there's an idea here, too, that Abraham, way back, got remarried at the end. He married Hagar, who was named Keturah in the Bible, and had lots of kids, and they went east. So the whole idea of Abraham going east is an interesting one. I have a dog that needs to go out, so I'm going to have to probably leave this on the screen for a minute. And what's interesting, though, is you have this concept in Hinduism called the chakras within you, which really closely resemble some of the ideas to the Sephirot. And although there's only 7 chakras, they correlate to the 10 Sephirot in that the 3 on each side, on the left, in the Kabbalah, it's the 3 on the side is Binah, Gevurah, and Hod, right? And they parallel the 3 on the right, which are Chokhmah, Chesed, and Netzah. So if you take the left and the right and combine them together, bring them to the middle, if you will, like in their unity, then you end up with 7, right? Because you have 4 in the middle, and then you take the 3 on each side and combine them, so you have 3 more in the middle, gives you 7. And they align very much so with the ideas found in the chakra system, very much so. It's extraordinary. The one that really blew me away was Anahata, which is the middle one, which is represented by the color green, oh my, represented by the Magen David, oh my, and means balance or harmony, oh my. It's like identical to Tiferet in the middle. And the others are very closely related. The throat chakra, well, that's left and right arms in Kabbalah, but if you put your arms out to the side, left and right, you'll see that right in the middle is your throat. So that's how earlier I said where the left and right come together. So this is really remarkable that these Torah concepts have gone out into the world, into other cultures and religions, and granted, they've been distorted. The further you get away from Sinai, the more distorted you're going to get. But it's just fascinating to see these things out there and wonder how they're connected or how we can connect. You have a common, some people will say this and think in terms of a contrary position. Well, the Torah says this, that says that, and I'm only going to talk about how it's wrong and different. Or you can say, well, you know what? If I meet some Hindu dude, we got a common interest to talk about here. You can take a different approach with this stuff with people and use it to bond and unify with them and get, to know them better and introduce Torah elements instead of being contrary and picking a fight all the time. So, did Hinduism copy it? I wouldn't say it's copying. I would say that these teachings have existed since Adam, if you will, to some degree, and Enoch and all these wise people. And then they were really clarified and solidified with Moses, who, unified them much with the written Torah and all these stuff. And that stuff's come down. So it's stuff that's been around a long time. It's pre-Torah of Sinai. It's goes back to the beginning, and the closest clarification we have is Jewish Torah literature that's emanated from the Torah itself. But you find this stuff out there, and you go to Japan. Japan has these festivals, it's kind of fertility festivals. I won't even describe some of the floats. Looks like a Caligula movie, but there's Hebrew writing on these floats, and there's Hebrew concepts discussed, and Torah concepts. And it's like, wait a minute, why are the Japanese doing this and writing this and talking about this? It's strange. So these ideas have gone out into the world through one way or another. So, I like trying to find ways to connect with people. And when you can find that their spiritual tradition has things that closely resembles yours, that's a nice, conversation piece, starting conversation piece, with people. I'm not a Hindu expert. I wanted to drag some of my online buddies in here to talk about them, but, yeah, the throat chakra. Yeah, they put your arms out. Yeah, it goes straight across. So it resembles Gevurah and Hesed. Yeah. So that's it. I'm going to pause there. My voice is gone. I'm pretty sure I'm running a fever now. I've been coming down with something, and I think it's going to hit the fan tonight, which is great because people at work have been sick with the flu and stuff. So I'm hoping it's not that. This is kind of lingering thing. Questions, comments. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just going to. What I'm going to do is probably unplug I can hear you. And this crazy thing came up on the screen. Let me stop the share for a minute. That makes it go away. So please, don't say that. Words have power. I don't even know what I said, so I'm forgiven. I'm delirious and overtired, so I have no clue what I said. Trust me. I'll get a dispensation there. I don't know. Oh, about the flu. Oh, yeah. I'll do a lot of lozenges and liquid here to try to deal with it. Woke up with it, and then it got better, and then it got worse again. So. Okay, someone take the mic and let's either talk about this stuff or then it goes back to the beginning that the whole Torah portion is about connections, and I tried to take that in this presentation and show the hidden text about connecting the priests through the worlds and the Sephirot, and those are the two main templates that we use. There's other templates, but those are the two main ones. The template of 4 with the worlds, and then the template of 10 with the Sephirot within each world. So you get that idea. When you do the Omer count, we focus on the lower 7, as I mentioned. The top 3 are more related to God outside of creation, right? Past, Binah, Chokhmah, those are beyond creation. So we study those independently, but in terms of fixing ourselves, or Tikkun Midot, that is dealing with the lower 7. And in the Omer count, what you do is, as you go through all 7, you look at each of the 7 has all the other 7 within it. So, if you haven't done this, it's you start with Chesed, you look at Chesed within Chesed, then you look at Gevurah within Chesed, then you look at Tiferet within Chesed. So you go through all 7 Chesed, then you go to the next week, you start with Gevurah. Because these things present as when you define them, you say, okay, this is what it's about. But in reality, nothing's that independent. So we do have aspects of mercy within our judgment and, all of this stuff. So that's why the Omer count is so cool, because you look at these different connections and you go through all 49 of them, Oh, I need to scroll up here. Okay, hold on. There's a question about Bar Zadok. Miriam, you want to just repost it? Can you rewrite? Is it long, or you want to just post it again? I'm sorry, I was trying to get through this thing. I wasn't paying attention to that. Chokhmah circles to Shekinah Malkut. I'm not sure what you mean by circles. Chokhmah. I'm so sorry. I'm just not understanding the question. As it's written. Beginning is the end. I mean, you have that sense of it with Keter and Malkut, because they're both related to kingship. That's generally how that idea is applied. I mean, you can apply it with Hesed and Malkut for the Omer count. It's always the idea of a beginning and end being connected process. But generally, when you say it like Sefer or Sefer Yetzirah is pointing to Keter and Malkut usually. There's relationships between the two also, like the idea that so you have Malkut and Keter. Keter's like just metaphorically closer to God, and Malkut's further from God. And you have Hesed is more merciful side of the plane, and Gevurah is more judgmental side of the plane. And then you have directionals, and then you have time. Past and present, we mentioned earlier. So you have Chokhmah, which is singular in the past, and Binah, which is complex and multitude of possible futures. So that's the time element. And then the others make up the space continuum. So you have
You have the six that make up that Zeron pin, which are Chesed, Gevurah, which is south and north. Chesed is associated with south. Gevurah, judgment, is associated with north, as you'll see in a lot of text. And then you have east, west, which is Tiferet and Yesod, Jacob and Joseph, if you will. And then you have up down. So like when you do the shaking of the lulav, and up down is Netzah and Hod. So you have those six that are associated with space. I said, associated with time. And then Eter and Malkut is associated with close to God or further from God. And with those things, you can target anybody. So you can say, okay, today is February, whatever it is, February 17th, so you have your time. I am sitting in this chair. You have the longitude and latitude coordinates for me. I'm sitting 3 feet off the ground, so you have the up and down coordinate. And I'm doing a Torah study, and I'm not shooting up, heroin. So the moral aspect. So you can map anybody, where they're at, what time they're at, and if what they're doing is a good thing or a bad thing, using the Sephirot in that respect. That's how you map anything or anybody in creation. Weird thought. Aleph and Tav and Revelation. I have some stuff on that maybe already in the study. The idea of beginning and the end. Yeah. There's other stuff related to Aleph and Tav too, though, but yes, to answer that. Yeah. Because Mashiach, right? Consider when he talks about Mashiach, about Messiah in Revelation, talks about beginning and end, right? So the Talmud tells us in a couple places, I quote this one a lot, Pesakim 54a, Talmud in that date says that there's 7 things that came before the world was put into existence, the physical world. And one of those is the name of Mashiach, which is the role and function of Mashiach. So Mashiach pre-exists on that side, right, in terms of the past, if you will, or the beginning. And then we're told in Torah literature, including in the book of Romans, by the way, when you properly decipher Romans 10:4, it says Mashiach is the goal of the Torah. So now one is looking past and one is looking future, the Aleph and the Tav here. So Mashiach was the beginning, right, created before the world. He's the life force of creation. One other text, the Gates of Light, calls him Mashiach. Soul of Mashiach is the life force of creation. So the Aleph and then Tav at the end would be our goal or the end point when the Messianic age comes. Mashiach's here symbolizing that. So you have the whole Aleph Tav there too, which is kind of neat. So, and all these things are things that Torah, repentance, Ganidan, all these things are things actually put in place to help us. It creates the question, did God know that everything was going to fail? And the answer becomes kind of apparently God knew everything was going to fail, which then leads to the question, did God design it to fail? And that's a subject for another night because it gets pretty wild. So YHVH is going to lead a study on that one night because she's been doing research into the shattering of the vessels and all that crazy stuff. She's been neck deep in. It's just like, oh my goodness, she's got a lot of good stuff. Hebrew version of Genesis 1:1. Well, what do you mean? Hebrew version or how it might be translated? Because there's some funky ways to translate Genesis 1:1, including what, if anyone's familiar with Daniel Matt, who has republished the Zohar. I got a video on him. The hyperliteral text says that in the beginning was created God. So the idea of God was created, which is wild. It almost sounds heretical until you understand what's being said. Fourth word in the Hebrew. I don't know. You'd have to. Mystics from various faiths. Yeah, when you get to the mystical area of Christianity and Islam and Judaism, there's a lot more similarity than when you get into the petty stuff and everybody's fighting and killing each other. It's true. You keep going back to the same source. The more you go back, if you're respecting truth, the more you start connecting with people. It's amazing. And Miriam was such a tzaddik. I put her at Yesod in between the two, that when she passed away, the well and all that. It's an amazing thing to show how important she was in that equation. Aaron and Moses were Netzat and Hod doing their thing. Netzat and Hod are called the wings of Yesod. So like the wings of Miriam was connected to the people. It's a beautiful thing, which is interesting because there's a woman playing the role of Yesod there, which is nothing wrong with that. As I said earlier, this is nothing about gender. She's playing the role of a Zedekus. It's the proper term for a woman. It's a righteous woman, Zedek. I'm going back looking at things I missed. I'm so sorry. Matthew 6:33. I have no idea. I don't have that in front of me. You'd have to tell me what it is. Fifth Element. Yep, there's a mystical. That's a very movie. Is a messianic movie. It's a female figure in the movie with Bruce Willis. And yeah, she's playing a messianic role to bring everything together. That's why she's called the Fifth Element, coming from that highest realm beyond existence. That world's called Adam Kadmon, which is a weird term. But yeah, they borrowed some pretty interesting things for that movie. Oh, okay. What else? Time? It's not that late either. Not for me. Just a little bit achy. Yeah, all my bones ache, so I've got to be coming down with something, right? And anyone, please take the mic if you want, or just like wait. It's just. I don't think I have a slide after this one. Let me see. Well, actually, I have about 30 slides after this, but they're my junk slides. Yeah, that was my my pause slide there, the white one where it paused and stopped. I got a whole bunch I didn't include because you could go all day and night on this, So I just wanted to, and you never know how many people are coming. It wasn't a bad crowd. I just wanted to cover stuff. A lot of this we've covered before. A lot of these slides I pulled, like I said, from 3 or 4 presentations from before, because the Parsha, that this Parsha and how it means to connect or connections and those hidden color codes. And this is a very important Parsha to establish that there's this like Kabbalistic understanding, behind the text, which you would just read and not think anything of it, right? So you know what to look for, which is another concept we're using here. To keep reading other things and you know what to look for, or proper, or whatever. So like I said, I want to do more interactive rooms because I can't stand talking too much. It's like, So we're going to do, Elisheva and I figure out her finishing the Direct Hashem class because she just wants to get the last one done. It's kind of dwindled down to a smaller group, which is understandable. It's hard for people to maintain that longevity, and some people just, the subject matter got a little bit intense, but might be next week or the week after. But we want to put together some really cool rooms on dreams, on spiritual phenomena, on the project some of you might know about or helping me with right now, which is the relationship between spirituality and psychology, particularly with regard to like mental health issues in the world right now that have become so out of hand and creating problems like substance abuse and suicide, all terrible thing. Now we're tracing it more and more to youth, to kids. 50% of mental health issues now, 50% are traceable back to age 14, freshman in high school. And it's like shocking numbers of problems they have because of the world we live in is crazy. Social media is crazy. There's never been a generation that's had to deal with all this kind of stuff. Never, not even close. This is such a unique thing, and it's creating a massive problem. And so that's an area that in my elder years here, I want to pray that I can semi-retire from my job. I'd like to just work part-time, and I can't afford to do it, so I'm going to need a miracle. So my dream would be somehow I can work part-time and start devoting much more hours to that kind of stuff, helping people, but especially younger people, to get ahead of the mental health issues, because everything you read about in the news, it's wonderful programs, but if you listen carefully, it's all about dealing with the problem after it's been happening or recognized. So it's like, oh, we need more programs, we need more money for these people, we need more doctors, and then for the kids it's like, oh, we need more awareness programs to recognize it. It's like, okay, that's all good for after the fact, but I want to develop something that's ahead of the game, and it's going to be very a secular thing, of course, to go out into the world, but it'll be built upon these kind of things like we talked about tonight, these deeper concepts and how you're being functional and all that. That's the track. That's Stephen Covey's book. That very well. The Matrix movie does it well. There's ways to present things in a way that's palatable to the masses. It's not religious, but it's built on those concepts. So that's my hope, is to develop things that can go into the schools and boys and girls clubs or whatever, even at the youngest age, like grade school, to get kids to understand how you function, how they function. The differences are okay. You work this way, they work this way, and hey, look, it's how you work together on things. And you introduce those things to kids at a very young age, and then you can keep going with that and develop it with, more and more existing literature and programs that are out there, and just putting it all together. But now I'm just rambling. So no, this is about getting ahead of the problems. If you have all these kids with mental health issues and you're trying to figure out now what do we do, what if we get ahead of that and cut the number of kids developing the issues down by 70-80%? Much easier to deal with 20% of the kids having a problem than 80%. You know what I'm saying? It's like, let's start getting ahead of the game so these things don't develop. And that's my hope and goal, is to work on stuff like that going forward. I'm blessed that my wife is a nurse, and she's a nurse, a psych nurse. She works, in a psych building. And, and she's there, and I work with people in medical. I'm not in the medical profession myself, but I work with all the people that are. So I'm surrounded by a lot of people who know a lot of good stuff, so I can connect with all of them in terms of what makes sense and what's appropriate, and if I'm out of my mind, and all of these things. So, on Psycho-Spirituality 2, PS2, just like PlayStation 2. I have a group formed. If anyone's interested, PM me. I have a Facebook group formed going forward to look at stuff. It's just kind of starting out. It's kind of very basic right now. I'm just throwing a lot of stuff into the group to ponder with, but I have to straighten some things out in my own personal and work life over the next few weeks, because there's a lot of garbage going on where I work, putting a lot of pressure on me, and I need to decide what to do with that. So that's what they say. So your prayers are absolutely welcome for my health and my work situation. So again, if you guys have thoughts and ideas of what you'd like to see for chat rooms, other than like something on dreams or something on prayer and intention, we're going to do prayer, meditative stuff. Also going to do a night on spiritual phenomena, which could be really a wild discussion, because a lot of people have said they've had strange things happen in their lives or their families or their friends, and it'd be an interesting night to discuss these kind of things and what they are about, what they could be, and why they happen, and all that. That'll be a wild discussion, because I got a boatload of stories to share, as does my wife. So that could be a lot of fun. Could be really crazy. But, if you're properly set up and you're really good at discussion. For a couple of other things that came up here. Let's see if I can. I'm going to see if I can find what the other two were here. If I can't minimize this. Find my way around it. All right, here it is. 1 second. Okay. Okay, here it is. Yeah. Okay, you'll love this. You're gonna love these next two topics. You ready? Next topic: Torah and artificial intelligence, AI. Because if you start to do some reading and studying into what AI is now up to, what it's doing, it's really remarkably resembling like the mind of God, if you will, in an odd way. You know what I mean? But it's just absolutely crazy what's going on with AI. And of course, that can be misused for bad or used for good. I'll put my nickel on the former, unfortunately. But AI and Torah is a great topic one night to have. And the other one, even weirder perhaps than that, is the idea of the relationship between Mashiach, Messiah, and the serpent, or the Teli, the Nahash. There's a really amazingly deep stuff that Elisheva has been looking into regarding this relationship between, God and the serpent, and it's not what it's not what you get in Sunday school. and then enter Mashiach as the twin or the counterbalance or whatever you want to call it. And that's just some really incredibly deep and stuff. So that's probably for much later, because that's way off the crazy chart, But I think what we'd like to do to engage more people is like the dreams and the spiritual phenomena and whatever that third one was, prayer and intention. Those are three very necessary good stuff, And most powerful force in creation is Hasatan, is the serpent. Calls the shots. This is some of the stuff she's been digging into is just really crazy. I have to have her repeat it to me like 3 or 4 times before I really get it. So that'll be fun, but that's more down the road, and that would be a particular audience. Whereas if we have a room on dreams or something, I think a lot of people could benefit from that, even people that aren't so Torah conscious but want to be part of the discussion. It might be good for them to hear discussion about dreams in a Torah framework, and like help them get some bearing on things, especially if they're having to deal with unpleasant dreams or unpleasant things. That can be a difficult thing. I've had some really peculiar, bad nightmare type dreams in my life, so we can talk about that. We can talk about when you have a dream and something comes true from your dream. What does that mean? There's a lot of things we can discuss, So, yeah, AI, yeah. Well, I'm a chess player by hobby going back since I was a kid. I got very good as a kid, but my mom and dad told me, no, you're not going to do that. You're going to go to school. So anyhow, I used to coach high school teams, and I published in Chess Magazine 1 year and stuff. But anyhow, watching this development of chess computers over the last, actually all the way back to World War II. They were started with some, with the tubes, the tubes and all that stuff, and transistors. And so chess computers have evolved to the point now where the best chess computers can absolutely slaughter like the world human champion game after game. Put it that way, the top human cannot beat the top chess program even once. Okay, and it's been that way for a little while. So you have this idea here that everybody's looking at these chess computers as being the ultimate master computer programs. I should say chess computer programs, right? The ultimate masters of the game, right? Well, just last year, maybe the year before it started, but this last year or so, there's a program called AlphaZero. AlphaZero is not a chess playing program. AlphaZero is artificial intelligence program. And they gave this AlphaZero artificial intelligence program one morning to teach itself how to play chess. We're talking right from the get-go. Here's the moves, teach yourself, right? Well, they then arranged a match that week, a week after, whatever, with the top chess computer program in the world. It's called Stockfish. And let's see what happens. And they played, I forget how many games. It was quite a lot of games. And the artificial intelligence program completely annihilated the top chess playing program in the world. So as much as that top chess playing program was so much better than any human, and we thought they were the gods of chess, this AlphaZero program is playing chess in a completely different way than anyone's seen. It's hard to explain if you're not a chess player, but it's so bizarre at times. Within reason, but it's bizarre. It's fairly normal at some points, but then it makes these moves, and we're like, why are they doing that? And it just has this whole other way of approaching the game and the moves and the play and the situations and all that they don't even quite understand yet. We're trying to figure it out. Bottom line is it's absolutely, winning against these top chess programs, which were untouchable up until a year ago. So that's just really freaky. And a lot of the early computer studies was done using the game of chess. There's always been a chess element to computer development kind of thing. It is a thinking game. There's no luck involved in calculating different types of thinking. But this is a fascinating thing to watch develop as AI chess world, but also just banking. We're looking to use these programs to solve world hunger and things like this. It's serious. I mean, these things it's like brain power of everybody on the planet, to solve these massive problems, and it is quite a thing to keep an eye on, Of course, we all know where it's heading, but yeah, it's like your developments going on in China now. The social scores. I don't know if you've seen that. It's awful what it's turned into. Everyone's given a social score, just a number depending on the things you're doing. They hire people all over the place to watch for people doing good or bad deeds. They'll monitor your spending habits, everything in China. You have a social score, and based on your social score, you're allowed to do certain things or travel certain places or not. It's complete, 1984 world domination going on in China now, thanks to wonderful American companies developing on. That and facial recognition is being developed there too. So all this nasty stuff's being developed within the closed borders of China by wonderful companies like, IBM and Apple and all. They're developing all this, which of course the future intent is going to be to use it on the whole world, which we say right now will never happen, but you know darn well it's possible. So it's pretty crazy, So I'm rambling here about current events, but it's all related. It's nothing to worry about. I never tell people to worry. I'm in control. We can talk about the idea of Gilgul, the Hebrew Torah concept of reincarnation. We can talk about that one night. It's not a big deal. Some people, different people are more or less comfortable with that. But, we can have a forum where that's part of an evening's discussion too. Channeling, then you have the whole idea here of like, is it okay for me to pray, and what if I don't know, what if the soul of a great prophet I think wants to connect with me or so, it's like, is that all crazy, bad, wrong? Is there any kind of precedent? We can talk about things like that, to have very good discussions that are based in history of Jewish literature, etc., on these subjects. It's, that kind of discussion, not just having everybody fight with their opinion on, oh, it's bad or it's good. We don't need that. It's not a debate forum, but just providing information and clarifying things. It's no big deal. Like I said, like people make it known there. Cool. Well, it's really nice of you guys to come and hang out. I'm going to save this thing. Again, I can't believe I forgot the first 10 minutes to record, but I think we can sum it up. I think I summed it up. Yeah, well, it's funny. I would say, if you tell people you talk to God about your problems or whatever, most people, you'll get a big, oh, that's so nice. That's so wonderful. You pray, you talk to God, you tell me your problems. That's great. If you turn around and say, and God talks back to me, they back off like you're crazy, right? But then, it's like, what does that mean? A lot of people talk to them, that's for sure. It doesn't, they're crazy. But still, it's like, well, just looking at it logically, if there's really a God that hears you, can't that God also, speak to you somehow? It's like, it seems kind of a lame God if you can only hear and not talk, right? Yeah, that's another subject, hearing God properly and Ruach Kodesh and prophecy and all that. That's another cool subject for sure. Yeah, the spiritual phenomenon night would be really rocking. That would be crazy. That could be humans, and living in the dead, and animals, and all kinds of stuff, All right. Well, we're going to call it a night. Thank you. I'm going to end the meeting. We'll see you during the week, okay? Please post this in the group in the link. If you got questions that come up or other people ask you questions, post them in the group. We changed the name of the group to Torah Fundamentals. It's called Direct Hashem for a while, but the link was Torah Fundamentals. So I just changed it to that because we're going to cover lots of subjects, not just Direct Hashem, but that's the same room and link also. All right. God bless. Lila Tov. Dog is whining. He needs to go outside. I'll probably go out with him. All right. We'll talk to you soon. Bye, all. Thank you.